First time I came here, it was natural, untouched, green, prestige. Now I come in here, it's like looking at a dump.
They say they didn't know about all this. They knew. I would never ever trust Rio again. Never.
A national treasure has been destroyed of extreme importance to the Australian nation.
To blast it was a conscious decision made in the full knowledge of the significance of that site. So the company failed and government administration failed.
I'd like to say very sorry to the Putu, Kunti, Karama and Pinakura people. You know, this has rocked me personally, and it was never our intent to cause distress.
3 years ago, Australia and the world watched in horror as mining giant Rio Tinto blew up sacred sites in Western Australia's Juukan Gorge. The ancient rock shelters had been dated back 46,000 years and held immense cultural significance for the Putu, Kunti, Kurama, Pinakura people, or PKKP. Negotiations between the traditional owners and Rio had gone back and forth, but on the eve of the destruction, traditional owners were trying to stop it, with no luck. The backlash was swift and brutal. Rio Tinto tried to contain the fallout, stripping executives of millions of dollars in bonuses. Its CEO and other senior executives eventually resigned, bonuses intact. The company also facilitated videos about how awful the whole thing was.
Country belongs to people, and it's getting destroyed. Don't let this happen. Never let this happen. Don't trust the people you put the trust to. Make them work hard for the trust.
But the fact remains, Rio and its senior executives knew of the gorge's significance for years and laid the dynamite anyway, in a delicate interplay of interest between mining companies who want the resources and traditional owners who want the jobs and security that come with development. It was a shocker. The federal government established an inquiry which recommended heritage protections be beefed up. And in 2021, WA's Parliament passed an Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act that had gone through multiple rounds of consultation with landowners and traditional custodians. It was heralded by the government as a game changer.
Land users will be required to consult, negotiate and enter agreements with the right people to speak for that country.
Back then, the critique was coming mainly from Aboriginal heritage activists like Dr. Anne Paulina, talking to the ABC.
But these controversial new laws are inadequate. They have been rushed through. They are not fit for purpose.
The government planned to create 40 local Aboriginal cultural heritage services, so-called one-stop shops that could oversee consultations with traditional owners and farmers or landholders with properties of more than 1,100 square metres. The laws meant that a landowner would need a permit if they wanted to remove more than 4 kilograms of material, disturb more than 10 square metres of ground, or excavate to a depth of more than 50 centimetres. The law imposed penalties of up to $1 million for individuals and up to $10 million for corporations, as well as potential custodial penalties for people who failed to properly consult. But importantly, it didn't give Aboriginal people a veto over any proposed work. All it did was impose a requirement to consult. And there were plenty of exemptions. Pools, garages and patios were all fine. Like-for-like building works didn't require consultation. But if a farmer wanted to change the use of his or her property, like, for example, building holiday chalets on a former cattle property, they'd have to consult. By the time the law finally came into effect on July 1 this year, the detail had become kind of irrelevant. The Pilbara elders you met earlier, they felt it was an improvement on the old situation and quickly negotiated a joint management agreement with another miner on their land, Black Cat. But farmers ran a powerful campaign against the law, even though they'd helped draft it.
This is the greatest attack on private property since Federation.
Tony Seabrook is the WA president of the Pastoralists and Grazers Association. Here he is speaking on Sky News.
The community of WA are damn well outraged that they've done this. It takes away from farmers the right to farm in the way we've always farmed in the past.
Seabrook needn't have worried. A little over a month after the law came into effect, it's been dumped, and it's a moment of triumph for the Farmers Lobby Group and the Coalition. The Liberal and National parties said they were worried about potentially huge costs for farmers. The Nats were also concerned that if an Aboriginal entity claimed a site was significant, there was no requirement for that claim to be independently verified. As he does, Federal Nationals MP Barnaby Joyce summed it up neatly.
If you've got a big housing block and you want to put a pool in, cultural officer. If you've got to dig a new septic in around a farmhouse, cultural officer required.
This is Joyce on Nine's Today program.
Look, we are not vandals. We actually believe in our cultural heritage of Aboriginal Australia. We don't go around... Juukan Gorge was an absolute travesty, shouldn't have happened. But we're not all Rio Tinto and Juukan Gorges, but we've been tarred with the same brush.
Much has been claimed about how this law is working in effect, including some dubious claims, like when two Aboriginal elders showed up at the opening of a freeway project and got in an argument about who was supposed to be doing the Welcome to Country. In July, locals in Geraldton, north of Perth, were going to plant trees at a bush reserve, but a local elder objected to the event on the grounds the site was culturally significant. The local mayor decided to shut down the event because of the elder's objection. At the time, Aboriginal Affairs Minister Tony Booty said it had nothing to do with the law and that the elder had acted without authority. But it didn't matter. By that time, the new law's name was mud.
There's two strong themes here.
Jeff Chambers is the Australian's chief political correspondent.
One is the obvious political theme that's being played out on the ground in Western Australia. You had Mark McGowan, one of the most popular premiers in the state's history, if not the most popular, suddenly resign, and you've got Roger Cook replacing him. Not a person with great popular appeal.
And then you had what the laws were doing to the debate about a voice.
So we heard over the weekend that Indigenous groups and farmers and others had been briefed that ahead of Monday's cabinet meeting over there that Roger Cook would look to dump those laws. And that has been welcomed by Yes 23 campaign director Dean Parkin, because that just removes another potential area for the no side and the coalition to pick up and run a scare campaign on.
You know, I can imagine Labor politicians with their heads on the desk in Canberra just going, we're trying to get some clear air to talk about the voice, and yet all anyone wants to talk about is this WA law.
Oh, look, yeah, and you can look at, various treaties and state-based voices. You've got all these state jurisdictions running off and doing their own thing. So when the feds come in, I guess people then are confused because they're thinking, well, isn't Queensland and South Australia and Victoria already doing a voice? Why do we need this additional voice? So it does absolutely add those layers of confusion.
The WA law will revert to the existing law that was in place before this new heritage protection law came into effect. There are also federal laws allowing the minister to intervene where Aboriginal heritage is threatened. I mean, are we in a situation where there are existing laws that just need to be used better?
100%. And I think Juukan Gorge was an example of the systems and processes going wrong. And there is an argument that you could legislate for anything, but anything that adds red tape, anything that restricts people accessing jobs or economic development, including Indigenous people in Australia, you have to be really careful that you're not overreaching. So I do think there is a tendency in this country at any level of government to introduce new laws, bylaws, whatever they may be, just to justify a political outcome.
Coming up after the break, why voice campaigners are celebrating the end of this WA law that was supposed to make everything better. There's a big reason why the controversy over this state law caught fire across the nation: the voice to Parliament. In November, Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek made a clear link between the voice and the federal government's commitment to protect Indigenous heritage.
Free, prior and informed consent, truth-telling and open dialogue, genuine partnership, the kind that can only be entered into by equals.
She signed an agreement with a group called First Nations Heritage Protections Alliance, in line with Labor's election promise to create powerful new cultural heritage laws.
We're protecting Indigenous cultural heritage for the same reason we're supporting the Uluru Statement of the Heart and the Voice to the Parliament. We are always a better country, more unified and confident and secure in ourselves when we give everyone a seat at the table and we listen to all voices.
When the Yes campaign was launched in Perth in July, its leaders admitted it was concerned the two ideas were becoming conflated. This is Greens Senator Dorinda Cox.
I think that putting those two things together is what we saw in the days of Mabo and the Mabo decision, that people would lose their backyards. And we don't want to go back to that. That's part of history.
This is all sounding a bit familiar. A big idea where the detail comes back to bite a government. That's exactly what's happening in slow motion to the proposed voice referendum, where the battle is narrowing down to demands for detail about one thing or another. First, the no side demanded to know what the voice would advise on, and after weeks of resistance, the government said it would focus on health, education, housing and employment. Now the discussion is about treaty, or makarata. That's a central part of the Uluru process that the Prime Minister's signed up for, but the government says it won't give detail about that until after the referendum.
And I think there is some feeling that they need to provide some details, and they could even put a positive spin on it, because the concern is that the no side and the coalition, as you get closer to the referendum, will say, well, look, no details on treaty. That means taxpayers are up for billions of dollars once this referendum is done and dusted. So I think it's that sort of balance of playing the politics, but you need to provide voters with detail, because they will call you out.
Jeff Chambers is the Australian's chief political correspondent.